Hello. What if the world's reserve currency were happiness instead of this? How would life be different? To get you to consider this, consider the TV show Lost. For those of you not familiar with that show, it basically followed a bunch of people that were stranded on a remote island after a plane crashed and that were cut off from the rest of the world, that had no contact whatsoever with the rest of the world for an extended period of time. Now, if you lived on that island, then basically this was of no use to you. It didn't matter if you had $5 in your pocket or if you're carrying bearer bonds worth $20 million. The $20 million was not going to equip you any better to survive or deal with your circumstances or make you any happier on this island that's cut off from the rest of the world than anyone else. Now consider you're one of those characters and you actually had a child on this island. So your child never knew or learned about the concept of money, but only basically lived his or her life trying to be as happy as he or she could every single day. And then one day, say when your child was 12 or 13, you sat your child down and said, in about 4 or 5 years, you're going to spend every waking hour of your day, or not every waking hour, but at least 8 hours a day, trying to accumulate a piece of paper that looks like this. And it's just going to have a person's face here and some random numbers here. But the goal of your every waking hour is to accumulate as many pieces of this pretty colored paper as you can, or in the instance of the dollar, cotton fiber as you can, that has random numbers printed here. Now, how do you think your child will react not having tied any conceptual value to this piece of paper in his whole entire life? He would look at you like you were mental, like you had lost your mind and gone insane. So think about that. Think about how this can apply to the real world. Now, do you remember that movie, The Truman Show, with Jim Carrey? If you don't, it was basically a movie about a man that was born into an artificial world, right, where everything was an illusion and not real. So the people he encountered every day were just actors hired to be a part of his life, and then there was a woman that was hired to be his wife, and there were people that were hired to be his co-workers. So basically he grew up from the time he was a baby to an adult believing that his world was real, but was all an artificial creation that had limitations, and he was not allowed to go beyond this a certain point, otherwise he would discover what the real world was like. So I think, oddly enough, that's what the real world is like today, that the elites have created an illusion of reality that's nothing like what reality truly is, and that most people believe it. Because, like, if you think about it, even people's beliefs, if you challenge them, if you ask them, like a simple thing is like people always tell me, oh, gold's too expensive. But you ask them, why is gold too expensive? And then they can't explain it. So, you know, if I ask someone, hey, you spent $100,000 on your car, but, you know, $1,000 or $1,500 an ounce is too expensive for gold. Why? And then they're dumbfounded. They have nothing to say. So most people don't even challenge their own beliefs. And they don't realize that their own beliefs come from someone else. Come from someone else telling them what to believe without ever critically thinking about whether that's true or whether it's not true. So in other words, people are entirely brainwashed for most of their beliefs. And these are beliefs that they will defend until you ask them to explain their belief, and then they can't explain why they believe what they believe. So, you know, this is another super critical, important idea to realize. So what we have today is an inverted pyramid scheme where what is real, people don't believe, and what is fake, people think is real. So let me explain this a little bit. For example, let's take organized religion. A lot of organized religion today is devoid of any spirituality. You know, you see churches building wasting, actually, millions and millions, tens of millions of dollars on extravagant, like crystal churches. For what? You know, when they say religion is supposed to be about helping the poor, couldn't that money have been a lot better spent helping the poor instead of building a ridiculous homage to religion? I've been to churches where I found the men to be sexist, the women to be racist, but yet they'll go to church without fail every single Sunday and think that they are religious. That is like ludicrous. I have been educated in academic institutions that have dumbed me down, that have basically eroded my ability to think for myself because they just encourage rote memorization. If you don't spit back what the professor wants you to say, then you get a bad grade. If you spit back exactly, you know, what they tell you to believe, then you get a good grade. So that is a dumbing, you know, that's, again, inverted. Education is supposed to make you smarter, but instead it makes you dumber and it erodes your ability to think for yourself. And then we have a large percentage of scientists today that are employed creating weapons of destruction, creating arms that kill people, that maim people, that destroy people, instead of inventing products that create prosperity and make life easier, make life better for people. So what we have is an inverted truth paradigm, or an inverted reality paradigm that exists today. So how do we invert this pyramid and free the truth from its constraints of illusion? I think it's actually quite easy. We just need to start valuing happiness as our most important currency over this. Because when you think about it, this is just a piece of paper with very little intrinsic value. I mean, the value of this, although it may say 5, 10, 50, 100, is really a fraction of a penny. So when you think about it, it's quite ludicrous that we spend most of our waking hours working to gain what's really worthless pieces of paper as our mission in life. That should not be our mission in life. But if our mission in life is to accrue as much happiness as possible as the currency we value, then everything changes. Like, consider religion again. If we look throughout history, there have been so many wars fought over religion. But if every religion taught that happiness was the goal, then how can you justify these wars where hundreds of thousands and millions of people have been killed in the name of religion? That makes no sense whatsoever if we start valuing happiness as the currency instead of fiat paper money as the currency that is used in religion. The same also holds true in academics. If we valued happiness as the currency that we're trying to sell in academics, do you really think Harvard would ever have granted Larry Summers tenure at 28 years old? Because let the students decide what teachers make them happy, what teachers challenge them to think for themselves, to develop their minds and their brains, and their critical thinking skills. And then you would find that you don't get banker shills or banker puppets as tenured professors anymore in these schools, and that, you know, the top-ranked schools in the world will no longer be Harvard or no longer be, you know, the Princeton and other Ivy League schools. Instead, they would be the schools that are producing the most bright and intelligent young students in the world that can think for themselves and that will go on to create positivity in this world, instead of, you know, opting to take the highest paying job that doesn't really create anything positive for society. And think about if we applied this model to the corporate world too, where the greatest returns would come to companies that basically did the most positive things for this world. So in other words, if a company was producing a product that sold and moved hundreds of millions of units, but those products were manufactured in basically what amounts to slave labor and sweatshop conditions where the employees are treated poorly, without respect, without given proper bathroom breaks, in conditions where they're inhaling poisonous fumes, poisonous chemical fumes, and so forth, then, you know, those companies' share prices should not be allowed to go above, say, like $2 an ounce. So in that way, we could, the companies that would grow the most would be the companies that are doing the most positive things for society and in a compassionate way where they treat their workers with respect. A lot of people are going to say that last concept is totally idealistic, and I do agree with you there. That would be something that would be very difficult to implement. But it isn't difficult to implement thinking about happiness as currency versus paper fiat money like this in your own personal life. And let me end this video with a story I heard just this week. I read that Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, was recently in an elevator with a New York Times reporter. And he asked that New York Times reporter, why does the New York Times hate bankers? Now, I think the more apropos question that Jamie Dimon should have asked of himself is, why do so many people hate me? Because if you find that you are in a position where the majority of people hate you, then that should lead to some self-introspection instead of arrogance and questioning why other people hate you so much. Because maybe it should tell you that you are doing something wrong and it's time to make a change, and maybe perhaps you should start valuing happiness as the most important currency versus just accumulating as much paper fiat money as you can. Because if you are doing something that is good and positive, then I find it hard to believe that the majority of people out there will hate you. Granted, there will always be haters out there that hate successful people, or the elite will always hate honest, good people for telling the truth. But that is the minority of people, not the majority of people. So if you find yourself in a position where the majority of people hate you for what you do, then I think it's time to make a change. So in this sense, you can easily make personal change for yourself. And in that sense, I think that you can bring about good global positive change just by being a responsible individual person. So I think if you give some of the ideas in this video a little thought, you'll realize that you make a lot of the truly important decisions in your life only with this currency in mind, but not with the currency of happiness in mind at all. And so I believe that if we all start valuing the currency of happiness as the most important currency in our life, that we'll start to see a lot of positive change in not only our lives, but the lives of people around us and in the entire world. To encourage all of you to give this matter a little bit more thought, I'm going to put a link in the video description below to 2 other videos that I highly encourage you to watch because I think they have a great message. So I please hope you visit the links below and also watch those 2 videos I list. And also, please don't forget to leave your comments below. And I thank you again for watching the video, and until next time, have a great day.